others should operate correctly. So he really takes one out of this loop to throw the rest of the loop into problems. And then the lymph system, which is really the lymphatic system, that's the L of ILF. The lymphatic system is designed to make sure that the interstitial fluid doesn't get too much. There's supposed to be a balance there, and this is a balanced system. The fascia responds to the needs of the extracellular matrix or the interstitial space. They're pretty much the same. The interstitial fluid responds to how the fascia layer controls the flow of fluid. The lymph system needs to be able to pull any fluids out, clean it. It's a sump pump. It has a lot of different uses. But if your lymphatic system starts to be overpressurized, it closes off and starts to pinch off the intake valves of that lymphatic system, the lymphatic vessels. Then you get more interstitial fluid buildup. Then the interstitial fluid even gets compressed and compartmentalized even more because of the fascia fibers that are in there. And usually it takes us to go in with these tuning forks, and there's a specific method or something that's needed to actually change one of these so much that it's going to affect the other two to be able to return back to its balanced system. That truly is vibrational fascia release technique. So when we talk about interstitial flow, how is the interstitial fluid getting into that space? It's supposed to happen. There is a very controlled way that the interstitial fluid comes into our interstitial spaces. We have a circulatory system here. We have the red that is our artery system. It's being pumped by our heart. Of course, it takes a loop to get oxygen through our lungs, but you can consider this a closed system. It has a pump. It pushes fluid through. Our heart is allowing our blood flow to flow to certain parts of our body, our digestive system, certain organs, our organs. And imagine that for this discussion, it's also pumping it out into all different parts of our, let's say, our superficial fascial layer here, just underneath the skin. So what we see here is in the arteries coming out from our heart, we have oxygenated blood. We have fluids in there. We have red blood cells, and then everything else in that blood is fluid. It's plasma. That is our interstitial fluid that comes out of our arteries. When the artery blood flow gets to a certain spot, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller in size as a vessel. As it gets smaller and smaller, when it gets ready to feed the cells in a specific spot, like right there on my arm, just underneath it, then there's this field that happens here. It's almost like it goes from a freeway into one of these smaller streets in a city. And then there's these valves that constantly monitor that spot underneath my skin right there. It'll monitor to see whether the cells actually require something, food, nutrition, certain chemicals. You have systems that are nothing more than a chemical communication system, and the things that you eat and the things that you ingest, whether it's man-made chemicals or the things that you're eating in your food, it all eventually gets distributed through this same system. And then there's these valves right here that is a capillary system where it's kind of going pink to purple here. That is, it has a valve system. So in order for blood to actually flow through this particular part here to get to the veins, it's flowing through that area only when the cells in that area need something. So it is designed to close things off and to control the amount of fluids that get pushed out of your arteries. When it gets into this system, let's say the valve gets turned on because there's a request by the surrounding cells. I mean, this is cellular size here. The arteries are so small at this point, they're cell size at this point. There are cells that are the size of the width of these very small arteries. And they get very, very small and smaller and smaller until the point that there's little capillary holes that are just slightly less than the size of your red blood cells, so that the red blood cells can stay inside the tubes and the plasma can be pushed out of the tubes based on the pressure on the outside versus the pressure on the inside. So the amount of fluid coming out of your arteries is controlled by the area, the localized area. But then there's also these things called seepage or seeping that the fluids can, based off of what's happening. Sometimes it can seep through those walls. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. When we get edema-like, there's a lot of seeping happening. It's leakage from the blood flow, the arteries. The plasma is seeping out into that space, and you've got problems. You got flooding. You have edema. Even if the valves are turned off, there's still some sort of seepage that can happen, especially in edema spaces. Even if the capillaries do not have enough pressure on one side versus the other, these osmotic pressures that need to happen is another gateway to make sure that we don't get over fluidized. Even if that pressure is not right, then it will just keep flowing through, and it will go on the return route, the veins. There's ways to pick up fluids from the veins. So that is part of your return route, to remove fluids from the interstitial space, especially if there's overpressurization or too much fluid. So this is the normal flow. We get plasma. This is the interstitial fluid, plasma coming out into the interstitial space. Some of it gets returned by the veins back up to the heart and gets recycled. More oxygen gets added to it. It grabs more nutrition and the chemicals and disperses it back out again. And then our lymphatic system, if you look right here, this is the same thing. We have our arteries here, and then we have this field of being able to feed the cells inside of this field here. It's an exchange field. But then you have a lymphatic vessels that sit inside of there, and it's actually so small in area that it's really literally cell size. Oh, I thought I had that picture in there, but I don't. Oh, it's down here. It's literally cell size. This might be a tissue cell right here, and this is an intake from the lymphatic system. It's a vessel whose whole sole job is to have some intake valves that brings the interstitial fluid in and remove the interstitial fluid. The interstitial fluid itself has probably some bad things in there, bacteria, viruses, foreign objects, metal, dead cells. Everything going on underneath your skin is in that interstitial space. It has to get out some way. It has to be cleaned. It's part of your immune system. Once it gets inside of these intakes, it's still a tube. It's a vessel that has no pump. Our lymphatic system has to get from our extremities all the way back up to basically back up to here before that fluid can be put back in to our cardiovascular system. So it's not only our immune system. Most people focus on the fact that if our immune system is bad, our lymphatic system shuts down. These nodes that are in here, these nodes that look like this, all that fluid goes into these nodes, and they're supposed to clean the lymphatic fluid. There's other fluids that get introduced into the lymphatic system that helps to clean it, helps to make it right, so that by the time it gets back up to the top, it can be fed back into as clean fluids back into our cardiovascular system to maintain really two loops. But in our lymphatic system, as it's flowing back up to the heart to go back to the venous system, the veins, it gets put right back in the subclavian veins right here, just underneath your clavicles. So it's not only coming from our outer regions of our body as a network, just like our cardiovascular system, but it also comes from inside of our gut. It's coming from our It's coming from our abdomen, and it's feeding back up, all the way back up to the same spot. It is the same exact system. By it not having a pump like the heart, then it really relies on, it has its own muscular system inside of these vessels, and it really relies on movement. It relies on, first of all, not being overpressurized by the fluids on the outside of these vessels, but the movements, when you get up and walk and move and stretch, that is what forces the fluids in the lymphatic system to make its way up and through these nodes. The nodes, the little pods here, the node groups, the inguinal groups in our armpits, behind our knees, those are really meant to clean everything and to push that out and make it further upstream, all the way back up to our subclavian veins. And that's our system. That's our lymphatic system. It is designed to pull fluids out of our interstitial space. If that does not happen, then we have problems. We have a loop, an ILF loop that has failed, and we can see that, again, here's another picture of the nodes and then the vessels that run through the nodes of lymphatic system, of our lymphatic vessels, that feeds all the way back up and into the subclavian veins. It's the constant loop. It's two loops that have a relationship to each other. One feeds back into the other. So based off of what happens in our body, we find that there is a fluid problem. There is a fluid pressurization problem. So from this point forward, when you hear the word fluid, I'm talking about interstitial fluid, plasma that's coming out of the arteries, mostly through the capillaries and the walls in that area. They go into the surrounding area, and then they need to be removed somehow. And we find that there is an overpressurization in a lot of places, and we can feel that. We can teach you a core skill of palpation on how to feel fluids, and then little pockets of fluids that are surrounded by collagen fibers. And then we'll talk about just the fibers themselves and how the fibers, when they get kind of snarled up, that creates a causal link, a chain that ends up leading to chronic pain. It ends up leading to range of motion restrictions, and our tuning forks can actually change that entire situation. We feel that this particular method, the VFRT, the technique, is something that's very unique, and it actually takes what the fascia research people are determining, which is the collagen fibers. To change those completely, there needs to be a stretch of the fiber, and there needs to be vibration. Those two things we can do with a tuning fork by striking it, vibrating it, and then pressing down on certain restrictions of the fascia. We actually can cause the fascia, tell it a new command to break down what's there, and to cause it to realign itself, to think differently from what it currently is, which is in a state of overpressurization. It's a state of restriction or adhesion or scarring underneath the skin, and we can fix those things with VFRT.